welcome to the kitchen table, and we've got a special. This is a real special. I'm going to talk to Steve about something that he's been up to, but first of all, have a look at this video.
Whoever wants to be the bad guy? No one wants to be the bad guy. We all want to be the good guy. In my new book, Being the Bad Guys, How to Live for Jesus in a World That Says You Shouldn't, I unpack the rapid way that Christians who once saw themselves and assumed that others saw them as the good guys in the culture moved to being seen as the bad guys. And they're confused as to why that happened.
Steve, you've been busy. You've been writing. What have you been writing?
Glad you should ask that. I've been writing this book called Being the Bad Guys, How to Live
You've got lots of experience of that.
Yeah, I do have a bit of experience of being a bad guy. How to live for Jesus in a world that says you shouldn't. So, excuse me. The book's basically saying that the change in Australia, or in the Western world in particular, around issues, big issues that we took for granted many years ago, that the framework of how we thought about who we are as humans was pretty much the same. That's all changed. And the Christian message about what it means to be human is in the firing line. And that is quite confronting.
Okay, so I'm a non-Christian. I'm watching this and I'm going, yeah, duh, glad you got it. Finally, of course you're the bad guys. You know, you're a bunch of homophobic, misogynistic, racist rednecks who are holding back the progress of science. And, you know, to be honest, you want to have your religion, that's fine, but just keep it out my face, keep it out of society. You know, just do it behind closed doors like you're some kind of secret club. Is that what you mean by the bad guys?
Wow, that was the machine gun version, but pretty much. The sense in it is that the Christian framework has been tried and found wanting. It's been found wanting morally, sociologically, culturally, ethically, scientifically, all those things, and rationally. But particularly at the moment, we're in a time where the issues of sex and gender identity are to the fore of our culture. So the point of being the bad guy is that once we were the good guys, and we've changed, as you can see in the writing in the book, that bad has been spray painted over the top of good. And it's saying the change that Christians are experiencing is quite unnerving. And there's a cultural framework, and it's not everyone in the culture that thinks this, but that's saying we've got to leave that behind us if we're going to move to a good place. If the utopia or the progressive heaven that we're heading for is to be realized, we've got to put the old ways of looking at sex and gender aside.
Okay, I'll come on to sex and gender in a moment, because I see from the book it's a big subject, favorite of yours, you know. So, I'll come on to that in a minute. But let me ask you this. You know, I've never known what it's like to be the good guy. You know, I was always in the bad guy. Has it really changed that much, or am I really just a whinging pom? And in reality, in Australia, you were the good guys and now you're the bad guys, or is that a simplistic notion, or you genuinely think there's been a significant change?
Yeah, I've never thought of you as a whinging pom, a whinging Scotsman, perhaps, but I think that as a Christian, Jesus said that to follow him would invite trouble. And I think part of the trouble that we haven't experienced the last centuries is the trouble of being on the outside of the cultural direction. And I think there's been a cleaving, I guess, of what the culture thinks is the good life. And that's around a lot of things, not just sexuality, it's a lot of things. Mm-hmm. And what the church says it. Now, often we've been sucked into the vision of the good life that the culture is pitching to us: comfort, autonomy, self-fulfillment, freedom, in ways that are actually unhealthy. And I think we have to be careful. But when you go to the Bible, you realize that there is plenty of material in the Bible that says, here's what it's like to live as that, what I would call a cultural minority, a group on the edge that isn't accepted by the society, but that can live in such a way that the rest of society is going, I don't technically believe what they believe, but there's something about them as a group that looks attractive. Even though I think some of their views are bad, it's almost like we are repellently attractive. That's the term I'd use.
Yeah, it's a bit like, I think it was Peter Hitchens, but also Douglas Murray at one point, saying that the best place to be an atheist was in a Christian country. You know, that there was a kind of, an appeal, a positive side of Christianity. And you're saying in this that for an awful lot of people, we are perceived as the bad guys. And one of the reasons of that is the whole question of sex. Now, there's a lot about sex in your book, so that should really make it sell. But I presume you didn't write about sex in order to make it sell. No. But well, I mean, why? What's that all about? What are you just forgive me for saying this, but I'm a non-Christian. I'm pushing back on you, saying, what's wrong with you Christians? You're obsessed with sex.
Yeah, well, given that the porn industry is one of the biggest money earners in the United States outside all major industries, and the combined revenue of all the sports codes, I would say the culture is obsessed about sex. I think I'm talking about the understanding that if you sign up to everything that the culture says about sexuality and gender and all the directions that it's going in now, and still hold to your other Christian frameworks, you'll be fine. But it is what we call the shibboleth, how the Christian understands what sex is about, who it's from, what gender is about, how God puts people together, even in the midst of difficult, broken world that we live in. That's the point of cleaving apart. If you hold to a Christian framework on that, it is what I call the shibboleth, the point of where you're wrong and you're going in the wrong direction. And currently in the culture, that's the primary issue that shows that Christians are actually the bad guys, that we're not on board this sociological, cultural train.
Yeah, so shibboleth just means it's the touchstone issue that people work out whether you're a good guy or a bad guy. Basically. And they're saying because of our views on sex and sexuality, we're the bad guys. And I presume in the book, you're actually saying, no, we're not really. I'm thinking a bit more.
Yeah, I want to nuance it a bit. There have been some bad guys. Like the church has had to deal with the crisis in the Catholic Church around sexual issues, and there have been other issues that show the church to be hypocritical. But that's not because we're following Jesus too well. That's because we're not following Jesus well enough. And I think that's the ultimate issue, that even Jesus was considered a bad guy in the end and got crucified. Not because of generally his views on sex, even though they would have been down the line with Jewish thinking at the time, but because he set himself apart as someone who's saying, actually, if you want glory, it's suffer now. If you want God to praise you, then you shouldn't be going around looking for human praise. One of the things I find is that many Christians feel very unnerved by the way the culture pushes back and will sign up to the cultural agenda just for an easier life or to be liked. Not everyone. Some believe it's actually the cultural agenda is right. But other people are very nervous. How do we get through this even though we disagree? How do we sort of look as if we do agree with the culture? And I think this book, I think I do provide some things in this that will really help churches in different situations.
Well, I've cheated and I've read it, and I think it's great, by the way. And I'm not just saying that because it's you, and I don't need to massage your beard or your ego or whatever, or your bald head. But, I think you're one of the bad guys who's turned good. But just this is my final question for you. How should the church respond to the way that society is changing so much? I mean, do we just say, let's just go with the flow? What does it really matter? Do we say, let's get angry and march down the street with a banner saying down with that sort of thing? Do we just get afraid and run away, to a remote island? I don't know, like Tasmania or something. Or is there another response that we can have?
Look, I think there's layers of responses. And what you've laid out there is what I don't think we should do. We shouldn't cave into the culture and just celebrate it. We shouldn't get angry and placard because we want our rights back and we want the 1940s to return or something. But I don't think we should head for the hills and build a cyclone chainmail fence, post guards or turrets. I think that's wrong. The Bible gives us a way of being those who are strangers in the world, an opportunity to still live as a community that looks very different. And as you read through the scriptures, you see that in the Old Testament as well as the New Testament, there are always places where God's people can identify strongly as his people, live in such a way that honors him, that serves neighbor, that even loves enemy. And I think those are the things that we're going to have to do in work, in education settings, in the public square. Those are going to be the three big areas where we're pushed back on around the sex and gender issues as work, education, and the public square. And we can operate in such a way that we show that our hope is not in this age.
Yeah. Well, listen, Steve, I'm saying this to the listeners or watchers as well. It's a book that's well worth getting. I have read it. I would strongly recommend it. If you're a Christian, absolutely. But also if you're not a Christian and you want to know, what do these guys think? What's going on here? I think it's very accessible at that level as well. But I think it's a big issue for us to think about, Next week we're going to come and we'll think about another. I'm actually thinking Return to the West Wing, but you still haven't watched it, you Philistine. So if you want to be a really good guy, watch all 7 series of the West Wing by next week.
So that's how much spare time I have. Yeah.
Yeah, that's how much spare time you have. Right. See you next week. God bless you all.